something to tell me how you had this epic failure in education. So you got a little pad there and pens. Everybody want to write something down for me? Or you're all perfect teachers, you never had anything go wrong? Do we have people logged in? Okay. Now, while you're doing that, to just describe me a little bit, I've been public school teaching almost 30 years now. Before that, I worked at Children's Museum doing science shows to get my way through college. I've done religious education, student taught at a Navajo school in New Mexico. So I've had a whole variety of different audiences to deal with. Sometimes they're adults, sometimes they're kids. You have a whole range of different people that you run into. Especially working at the Children's Museum, you would often get, family groups in, or you get local kids that were coming in because it was too rainy outside. Then back then it was still free for the local ones to come to the Children's Museum. So you get a bunch of people that would come in a whole variety of different reasons and why they were there. And then once they started charging admission, then there's a certain amount of entitlements, and that kind of changed. If you didn't have a really good presentation, then they started to be complaining because they spent good money to come in there. So you have all these different kind of dynamics to go with. So I see a couple people still writing. So let's go ahead and move up to the next slide. So I've been in, over 30 years. I should probably update that. Currently, I teach at Shelbyville High School. I teach physics, environmental science, and industrial or introductory chemistry and physics. So we do all of those. My worst teaching experience. I was still up in Indianapolis Public Schools. One year, there were staff cutbacks. And in my infinite wisdom of going to college, I decided I needed to make sure I worked for a living. My wife has a tendency to want me to bring in money to pay bills. You know how that goes. Spouses, you got to work together. So instead of getting a history minor, I got a math minor. Because I had the math minor, I had the choice of either letting one of my colleagues get laid off or me go teach math class. So I took math one year, and I was down in 6th grade. And it was Read Across America Day, I think is what they called it. And you're supposed to sit around and read all day with 6th graders. I don't know who came up with this crazy idea. But to get 6th graders to do the same thing all day long was insane. Oh, that was like epic failure. The other teachers, especially the reading ones that are more used to it, but I was supposed to make kids do math and read all day long. And it was a pain. Then they had the time where you're supposed to sit around on pillows and read the books, silent reading. And they had all their snacks because they could bring all this extra food in. And the food was all over the place. Somebody dumped their soda in someone else's shoes. And it was just, at the end of the day, the teacher's like, oh, how things go? And I go, well, I'll see if I come back Monday. I don't know. I mean, it was that bad. It was like one of the worst days of instruction I had gone through. And I had some rough days back in the day. So that was just an entire disaster when it came to doing that. But the main reason why I enjoy teaching and what I do is I like to make those connections and get people to see things from a little different perspective. And that's kind of what I'm looking for as we go through here. So let's see what some of the notes you got down for me. Anyone else? You're still writing? Any other little notes? All right. Now, part of the reason for doing something like this, especially in this kind of setting, because I know here I've got people at a whole range of experiences and backgrounds. So let's see. So we have park naturalists, we got environmental educators, the Dune Center, and so we have a bunch of people. Most of you are not, doesn't look like you're professional teachers here from this standpoint. So there is a number of these things going on. So now, because of this, in classroom, I typically, when I bring up a concept or have a idea of what to do, I will throw up a question to start off the day, and it drives the kids nuts when they don't know the answer. And they go, wow, this is going to mess up my grade. And I go, no, this, you just have to try and give me an answer. The only way you fail my class starter assignment is you put down, I don't know. You need to have some kind of some effort into doing this. So it looks like I have a bunch of people, for the most part, that are going to be dealing with people from different backgrounds. The one thing about teaching in public school, once I get to know my class, I know what I got for the most part. And every once in a while, you still get stuff that surprises me. And all of that plays into what my audience can do. So from my standpoint, I have students this year. I probably got 130 or so all day long. I probably have 20 English as a second language students. I've got another 15 or so that go through professional counseling for different issues. Then you got another 30 that have some sort of learning disability to deal with. Then you have one kid was telling about his dad's in prison over in Ohio, and he's with mom, and every morning he's eating breakfast in my class, which consists of snack chips from the convenience store. So you have all these kind of different dynamics that are going on. So when they come to your parks facilities and places, you don't know any of that. You just have somebody there that you're trying to work with and to help out. So, and you kind of got to look back at, So teaching with your audience. So you don't know who you got. When I was at the Children's Museum, sometimes I have a packed house of 30 or 40 people, and we have ranges of things. Sometimes we had school groups come in, especially in the spring, and you got a teacher that's got 30 kids on a field trip mode, and they're all hyped up running around like crazy. None of you have any of that out in the woods. Kids are always calm and polite. So you have those things. So once you understand what you've got, now what do we do about it? So go ahead into the next slide. So the problem is, here's the thing, something to think about. So you have a lesson designed for 8-year-olds, but you now have a group of mixed ages. You got teenagers, some adults, all the way down to preschoolers. What do you do? So here is your challenge to think about this. Try to think of some visual aids, and I'm at a state park. So the best visual aids, hey, we got leaves around here. There should be a few of those outside. So let's take a look at some leaves. And your concept is to explain to children why leaves change color. Wow, that's when you work with what you have, and we'll build from there. So you have some leaves to look at. Are they all the same color? They're not. And so why aren't they all the same color? Different species. How do we know the different species? They're different shapes. Okay, what else? You got stem length, okay. Any other observations you can see about your little leaves here? They're going to feel different. Now, is any of the questions I've just said make a difference on what age group you have? Could you ask those same questions to kindergartners? And you could ask them to adults or anybody in between. The real challenge is, what do you do once you get the answer? That's where you really focus on how to change and guide your instruction. You let your answers of the questions dictate where you go next. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So you have your audience and you have your learning objective. So you have this lesson, I'm sure at a parks, what would be the reason for having a lesson about leaf changing color? What's your objective in your instruction? Or just it's a fun activity, I want to do it. Do you guys have objectives as park people? Or talk to me. You're interested in talking about seasonal changes, okay? All right. Okay, that's another good way to look at it. So oftentimes when I've talked with people that are informal educators to try to help service the public, most of your lessons are going to be tied back to some sort of state standard. Is that reasonable to say for most of you? There's going to be some connection back to that. And so that's going to be your learning objective. Oftentimes you're doing the activities, especially in your settings, you want something to be engaging. The kids are going to have fun as they come out, but you want them to learn in the process. So you know your audience, and then you have your learning objective. So once you keep your learning objective focused, then you can go from there. You have other considerations. You want kids to enjoy what they're doing because you want them to have a positive experience to be out in nature at your facility. You want to make your program have a good image so people keep coming back and keep your boss happy because everybody's got a boss of some fashion. So that's it in there. And there's a certain amount of funding. You know, if you're at a non-for-profit facility and you keep picking off the guests, they're not going to encourage any more donations to keep your programs running. So there's those kind of considerations are real and they're in the back burner of what's going on. But the main thing is your instructions. So you're trying to use your instructions to guide your questions to guide your instruction. So we have leaves that change color. Now, if leaves change color, what do all leaves start out in? What color are they? Green. What do they end up? Brown. And what happens in between? Okay. So why are they changing color? What so say chlorophyll. So what's chlorophyll got to do with it? They're shutting down, so they're all dying. Okay. All right. So some of these responses, if you don't know where your children are at or your audience is, based on their responses, we talk about trees shutting down. How would you respond back to that if you had fifth graders? You got 10-year-olds. What would your good appropriate age level be response back to that? Sleep. And what else sleeps in the wintertime? Other animals. So you go into hibernation. That is an easy correlation to pull from at that age level. That's something they know about and they've heard about, and they can then bridge that information over into trees going dormant or hibernating, for the sake of a better term, that you could build into that. So you're trying to take something they know and tie it back into where they're at. So let's go on to the next slide here. Now, to be able to do this, you got to have a little bit of an idea of what's going on at each age level. Now, granted, we've all been through these ages before. Do you remember what you were like when you were 5? So what are some descriptors for 5-year-olds? When you're making a presentation, what do you have to be in tune to when you're dealing with kindergartners that come through your program? Okay. They're always touching everything, right? And hopefully they've gone past eating everything. I've got twin grandkids right now. They're about 1.5 years, so they're still in the eating everything mode. So we have to keep in that. So what else about 5-year-olds? They like tactile. They want to do things. They're going to sit there nice and calm and listen to you, right? Right. You need to. So we got to keep it moving. They're not just going to be wait for you to come up with something. You got to be ready as you go along with these. So you got to be somewhat active. And the attention span for 5-year-olds, yeah, it's going to be really small. So you're really chopping things down into small tidbits so they can come away with what's going on. All right, what's a 10-year-old? Now we jumped up 5 years. How's that changed? So how are 10-year-olds now different from a 5-year-old? All right, so there you can start bridging into a few more abstract ideas with 10-year-olds. They're going to be, in theory, they're going to have a little longer attention span, but you know, depending on the kids, some of them may be a little more hyperactive than others, and depending on what's going on, they have a hard time switching from one thing to another sometimes, especially when they get into field trip mode away from school where all the structure is. If they don't have enough structure, or the teacher that's bringing them or the group that's coming in doesn't have the structure, so you're going to have to keep some structure in there. They also respond fairly well with rules, so you can set some parameters on what's going on. Now, some of your instruction programs, if you're doing a rotation of stations for some field day with a bunch of kids, you may only have them for 20 minutes or 10 minutes. If there are family groups coming in, you might have them for a longer time going through different things. So you got to gear that to what your time frame is and how much time is available. All right, now what the 14-year-olds? Now we got the teenagers. So how's that change what's going on? What do 14-year-olds do? All right. They have a lot of self-image about what somebody else thinks about them, right? So, you know, if it's okay, I'm really kind of interested, but I can't be too interested until I find out what the group wants me to be. And so creating that little safe bubble that they can get into those things and be open to some of those aspects. And when you got mixed age groups, what happens when we got one of each? How do we gear all that in? You got the parents that came with them. And we're going to keep everybody engaged. So we have a whole range of things that's going in here. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide. Here are some of the few little things I put down in here. The 5-year-olds are active. They're very curious. They're really happy to learn about stuff. When you teach a kindergartner about something and they see this little bug and this crawls under the log, it's just the coolest thing ever to be able to explain to them. And when I did the same activity, basically I have decomposition log slices that we flip up and do population studies out in my ecology lab. And when I do that with my high schoolers, it's like, oh, this is gross. We don't want to touch that thing and all those kind of things. So I switch it up. What do all my high schoolers have? Well, our school has iPads, but a lot of schools, everyone's got a phone. Okay, so if you're worried about touching anything, take a picture of it and then we'll do the counting of the populations later. So we just adjust to what's going on. The elementary kids just love getting into the bugs, but the high school kids, that's kind of beneath them at that point. They don't want to do that. 10-year-olds, they got lots of rapid growth going on. They don't like to be treated like little babies. So they want some responsibility and they want to have a little bit of autonomy, but it's got to be a safe place that they can get that into. 14-year-olds are really open for a lot of logical discussion, but they're very conscious, as we mentioned, about how they fit in with the group. And with mixed ages, when you have a group and you're making questions, you always have that one or two that know all the answers and their hands shoot up first, right? Now, if I gear my instruction to that one most active child, what's happening to the rest of them? They're disengaged. They know they're going to get all the answers. And I've got one kid in one of my classes at school, and he's socially extremely inept. He doesn't mix well with the other kids. He's very much into an outburst kind of mode. And so I have to, and he gets frustrated when I repeat things for the other class because he's actually pretty bright, but he just doesn't know how to act very well in a group setting. It's like, okay, you're fine, Augustus. Let me help everybody else. And it's okay to sort of say, okay, you had your turn. Let's get someone else to talk. Especially at 10 years old, they're used to that in school. So it's not that you're shutting them down, is you're opening up the conversation to a few other people. And some of the other people are very content in not engaging because that's their comfort zone. And so it might take a little work to draw them out. All right, let's go on to the next one here. Now, questioning is the key to getting multi-level instruction. So you have knowledge-based comprehension. Has anybody heard of Bloom's taxonomy before? Everybody loves Bloom's taxonomy. This is basically the way we leveling questions as we go through things. So if we do Bloom's taxonomy, knowledge level. So for kindergarten, we talk about leaves. What knowledge do a kindergartner needs to come away with our leaf illustration here? Okay, so why are they changed? What? Leaves will change, okay. What's something else a kindergartner could come away from this activity with? They're all different because from different trees. And the one thing I like to always illustrate, because kids, not as much for kindergartners, but when they get older, is, okay, they're all from different trees, but they're all still trees. People are all different, but we're all still people. And we can still have our own uniqueness and still be part of the group, and that's okay. All right, so how do you explain to a kindergartner why your green leaf is now yellow and is going to end up brown? What is a level a kindergartner could pick up on? It's drying out. So how does that change the color? What do you think? Okay. Okay. So they're going to get the leaves. A lot of times you'll do the rubbings with the leaves to get the shapes. You're going to focus on those things. But there's a simple little analogy that I believe kindergartners can handle. Okay. All right. So you have on a blue jacket, right? What color is your shirt underneath? Green. So if you took off your jacket, we now change color, and the leaves are losing their green jackets, for the sake of a better term, and we have another color underneath. Is that something you think kindergartners could work with? It's visual. It's something they have experience with, and you can actually physically do it. Because a lot of times with the elementary kids, you're dressing them up like animals and doing the motions and all that kind of stuff. So that is a good analogy of building this into the idea of, okay, now we can go from there. So with kindergarten, we can deal with the different species. We can deal with the change from the green leaving, and we have the color underneath, and eventually it all dries out and turns brown. Okay. So do you think they can deal with chlorophyll? Chlorophyll is probably a little more than some kindergartners are going to be able to manage. There are a few that probably could start picking it up, but that's probably the level I would work with. Now, how can you know if you're talking about, okay, why are leaves green, and somebody pops up with chlorophyll? Well, I know kindergartners can't deal with chlorophyll, so I'll just let that go. Is that really guiding your instruction? So you use your questions to know how far to take it. And that is one of the essential elements in really guiding your instruction to different age levels. Once they have an idea of what's going on, then you can build it from another one. So that's the knowledge level. How do we know they've comprehended what's going on? Is there some way to phrase things so they have some comprehension of what is going on? We gave them some basic knowledge. They know leaves change color. What can we use for a comprehensive level? All right. One of the big activities you do with leaves is you do leaf rubbings, right? And this might be a stretch, and I haven't worked with kindergartners for a long time, so, and I guess my grandkids get older, I may have some more hands-on experience with that. But especially they're twin boys, so you know, we're gonna have all that going on. But what if you did leaf rubbings? We start off with the leaf rubbing green. We transition to a leaf rubbing in yellow, and then we go into brown from there. And so they can make their own transition. Could you back up the slide or two? Let's see if I can find, one more. Yeah, so they can do a leaf rubbing to make this transition. And I think that's about the level kindergarten is going to be able to handle. And it gets them active and it reinforces the idea they'll build that comprehension. The reality is that a short lesson, you may not know the comprehension of how far we're going. All right, go ahead and go back to where we were. All right, so if we're doing with 10-year-olds, how far do we go? Do we go into chlorophyll with 10-year-olds? So 10-year-olds, you're dealing with what? With 5th grade-ish around there, if I remember right. So yeah, chlorophyll is a concept that most 5th graders should be getting talked about in school. Why are trees green? A lot of them will come up with the term chlorophyll because they've heard it in class. Now, how can we make that more engaging to them at their level? If you just had that level, how can we build this idea into something else? Okay, why chlorophyll is there? Now, in the earlier ones, we have different tree species, right? Okay, and so all trees have green leaves, right? So how many different kinds of green are there? Do all trees have, and you can have crayons with you, are all trees this one shade of green? So the amount of chlorophyll changes depending on the species and also the underlying color behind it that you can build into those things. So we get into the idea, now we have a variety of species because we have different shapes. We also have a variety because there's different levels of green in our paper, our leaves. We can see they're different. Then you wouldn't be able to do it necessarily in a one-time session. As a teacher, I would end up going, okay, we have this shade of green here. In a couple of weeks, when the leaves change color, what do you think the leaf color will be underneath? Is there a correlation between the fall, autumn color and the shade of green is before? I don't know, but that's a good question to look at. And so they want to start thinking about things. So we can go into the tree species, we can go into different shades of green with the possibility that these different green things are going to have different amounts of chlorophyll. Will the analogy of the coat idea work with 5th graders? Yeah, that will probably build into them. Is there something else we could do to get them to go a little farther with that level? What's something more than just saying you're covered? Because technically, we're not just have a coat of green on top of the color. It's all together in the leaf. So what's another way of doing that? right? You could go that way with it. Okay, so she was saying if just like in the other slide, you have a line of leaves with that transition of colors, they could go into there. So how can you illustrate to a fifth grader that the pigmentation of green and the pigmentation of the leaf color is actually together in that leaf? How can you do that? Now, building off your same idea of the colors, what if we had thin enough paper? You did the leaf with green, and then when that chlorophyll fades off, you have another leaf color underneath. And you just overlay, instead of the kindergarten, we put them all together in sequence. Now we're going to overlay them like a book. We can peel back a little less green and make another page of a little less green. And this is really all sandwiched together into one leaf. And they're kind of seeing that as this one thing fades out, you can do that with it. The other thing is interesting is things have more than one color. This is a fun experiment that fifth graders like doing. If you simply take wet, you can do this. It's safest with fifth graders to do a washable marker, water-based marker. You put that in there, predict what colors is in that marker. It's a green marker, what color is going to make up green? And once you put that marker, soak it into a paper and just put water on it. And that paper colors will start separating. And you can see that even though it's a solid color here, there are other colors that make it up. And that shows that the leaves, you see mostly green, but when the green fades out, you can see the other colors underneath. And you start building into a little more abstract concepts as you go into those. If you really have time, with a little bit of diluted bleach, you can actually bleach out sections of construction paper to see the colors that's underneath. Those kind of things you're looking at. But the overlay, I think, is a good idea for those things. So we have the knowledge level, we have the comprehension, the application. How can students apply that? What could they do to help apply this knowledge to something else? You got the flip book. In some schools, they go, okay, you know about these. What kind of, taking the flip book idea, what kind of little flip books can we make for the kindergarten class down the hall? And then we can go down there and talk to them about leaves. And the one thing to be able to teach the material, now they're up to application. Because they can explain it to someone else. We know they've comprehended it. They applied their knowledge to something else. So those are just little things to build that up. Now we go to teenagers and why leaves are different colors. So what can we do to get a teenager? And we already said teenagers are worried about the group. They are much more interested in their image. If they think something's beneath them, it's not really that important. And they're definitely concerned about what someone else is going on in that particular group and how far you can get them to interact. And I've got my challenges dealing with that. I got two groups of environmental science students, and I could literally leave my classroom, go down to the teacher's lounge, get a snack and a soda and come back. They'd all still be half asleep in their chairs. I mean, even without supervision, they just not motivated to do much. And that's a challenge. And I've got a couple kids I can get to think about things and we'll do some of the interaction, but most of them are just not really into it. And so you kind of have to build with your group. Can we find out in a short time who your group leaders are? Because that's the key to dealing with teenagers. Who's the ones that are actually in charge? Who's the ones the rest of them are looking to for the lead? And that's the key challenge dealing with teenagers. And sometimes it's not necessarily the popular guy with the Letterman jacket. or those kind of things. There are certain people in the group that the students will gravitate to, and some of that just a few probing questions. These are the kind of questions you don't just do a blanket question to a group with teenagers. You may want to target one or two, see how they act walking up the trail, who's by themselves, who are the ones the other kids want to walk with. Go to those kind of things, those subtle cues that go into these ideas. So teenagers, they already know what leaves are. They already know they're going to be different colors. They know what green is. They should know what chlorophyll is. So what else can we deal with teenagers? Or is this concept beneath them and we should just move on? Okay, we got different species based on the coloration. That's true. All right. Mm-hmm. True, they could do those. One of the ones I do is, especially if you're not just doing this in the fall, is my tree healthy? So at my school, I have a 7-acre ecology lab, and I can take them out there and do all sorts of stuff with trees. But for this lab, it is so much easier to do in the schoolyard where everything's nice and manicured. I go out the side door and I have a whole row of trees along the street. And if you look at the trees, and these are trees I see going to the bus every day, I go, is this tree healthy? And it's like, I don't know, it's got green leaves. I guess it's okay. So we will look at one leaf. Now give them a few parameters to look at. All right, so if you know if a tree's healthy, it's gonna have some nice green leaves, right? Is that the only way to tell whether a tree's healthy? What are other indicators to determine tree health? Lichen on it? Is that what you said? Okay. Dead branches. All right, stuff for the bottom. Okay, for students who are teenagers, still have been in accidents, they've broken bones. Anybody have scars? So I'm missing the fingers. So I've been through things. I have lots of scars. What do tree scars look like? Things like that. So we start working then. I start with a nice healthy tree. All the leaves are green and everything else. I go to my next tree and I haven't figured out why it does this. But in midsummer, half my leaves are yellowish green and the other half of the tree is dark green. It's like, what's going on? Is this tree really healthy? It's struggling because it's not making enough chlorophyll. And if it's not making enough chlorophyll, what else is it not making enough of? Enough food for it to keep surviving, because it's going to live off that photosynthesis. And they know photosynthesis by this age. So now we're starting to see that, well, what else on this tree gives us an idea there's problems? And you can see where they lopped off branches to help mow under the trees. So you got those scars from that damage the tree went through. And you might see ants, carpenter ants might be working on parts of it. You have the scarring of the weed whacker around the base of the tree where they trim it back. And so you have those different things. There's something going on here. Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's true. It would help if my school actually mulched them. they don't do anything. So mhm. And to making food, you could probably get more food production in with the 5th grade group They're going to get it. They're going to have introduce the photosynthesis at that point. And the high school kids, they know photosynthesis. That's one of the few concepts you really don't have to do much with. But so now we're taking the leaves. We know they change color in the fall, and trees hibernate. They know that stuff. That's their comprehension. So we're going to build on that to other aspects of tree development. And if I keep going down my trees, I've got an interesting selection, and it just happened to work out this way, where I got one that was hit by lightning. It's got a big lightning scar down the side of it. I got one sits there by the tree. Someone hopped off the road and hit the tree, and it's got a big scar, and the tree is regrowing over where the car hit it. And if I keep going down, I got an interesting one where the roots are only going off of one side of the tree. They're not growing down off the other side like you have that normal spread of roots. And I've got the old pictures where they're growing around a rock. It's got a big rock at the base of the tree, and the roots had never developed on one side. They saw one on the other side. And now that rock is, you can only see like 2 inches of it underneath there. So that's changed that one in it. So each one of those trees has a different experience in life and has different things it's dealing with. Some are doing it better than others. If you have a group of kids, especially have some emotional challenges and counseling and those kind of things, it is a nice analogy to see even trees have problems. And what you deal with your problems and how you manage those things is going to help you in the long run. Yes, every tree has a story and every student has a story as you go through these. Let's see how much time I got left. 15 minutes, okay. I tend to run long, and there's no bells here to tell me when I'm done. So we have to keep going. All right, so blooms, we have knowledge, comprehension, application. Now with high school kids, I can get into analysis. We can analyze that tree based on these factors. We know which trees are doing well, which ones aren't. And there's a number of things, and it doesn't take much space to have a problem with the tree. We had one we just had to cut down this year. It was an oak tree they were trying to plant, and clearly it was being planted in all this disturbed soil from when they made the addition to the school. So it was all subsoil. There's nothing good for that tree to grow in, and it struggled for years before it finally died, and they cut it down because it wasn't looking good. But 6 feet away, the older trees that were there before that last addition are doing fine, and it's a different species, and matching those conditions to those places. And we'll go through and get that at application level. Okay, what does this tree need to help it be better? What kind of conditions are going to help improve it from this standpoint? Which trees are older? Just because it's bigger doesn't mean it's older. Because we can have some really big trees that are young, but they grow fast. So you got really slow trees that they can be older but grow really slow. And so high school kids can start building those kind of ideas as we just expand from leaves to the actual tree to the actual life processes that go along in that tree to keep it going. All right, so let's keep going here. So there's a bunch of ways to do questioning. If you're in small groups, these are typical class questioning ones. You explain something to your neighbor you're sitting with. Think, pair, share is another classroom one. Choral response, we had that going pretty good at the campfire the first night when you're reading your poem and you got everybody coming back. And some teachers are really great at that. I find my language teachers at school are really good doing these. I've never been really great at that one. A value line. We were going through climate change the other day, and you had the continuum of attitudes about climate change. And having that little timeline sort of thing of what you believe, what you don't believe, what's the information you have about that, that could easily be done in a group setting, just lining people up, or in a classroom, or whatever you could fill with. The shuffling of deck, just randomly asking questions to different groups. Some teachers actually put names on popsicle sticks and draw them out randomly. When you're in a group setting, you want to try to mix up your questioning as much as possible to include as many people as you can. You have ways of voting. You can rank things in different orders. I do a lot of blackboard and whiteboard sharing. My physics students had to diagram a problem and explain it to everyone else. The more you get students explaining to each other, the more you're really up to that application and knowledge level. And depending on your time frame that you're dealing with, that's going to really make a big difference on what you can get into. Let's go ahead and go to the next one here. Frequency. The more questions you ask, the more understanding you have about them and about what they're thinking. So after starting this discussion with y'all and where you're at now, I have a better understanding of what all of you are at, where you're coming from, what your experiences are, and how you look at some things just on our questions and interactions. Now, if you have one-time contact with people in the public at your park or your facility of some kind, that's going to be hard to do sometimes. But you could still take that idea and expand it into people that come in from those different grade levels. Especially if you have the same school groups coming back year after year. Oftentimes those field trips get to be annual events, and you know you're dealing with that kind of age group. You could start thinking about how you factor that into your presentation for that school and for that group. Especially if you know the teachers involved, you get some connections with them, you know what level they're building things into. So essential planning is essential in any of this instruction. You can go through and wing it, and hopefully you get the right questions to get things going, but you should always have in the back of your head, what happens when this goes south real fast, and what can I improvise with at the last minute? And if things go too fast or things are really involved in some deep discussions, I'm going to have to drop something off at the end because I'm stuck at a certain time window with these people. And I want to make sure they're going into. So you have your traditional paradigm where the teacher asks the questions, you call on students, but you want to give them time to think. So oftentimes the most uncomfortable one is that silence where you're letting them process. And one of the frustrating things with masks is it's a lot harder to see who's still processing and who's not, and who's really coming up with the idea. There's oftentimes I get my students and okay, explain this, and I go, oh, you're in the right neighborhood. Let's see if we can refine it, and we'll get someone else to build off of what that person said. Now I could say, oh, that's wrong, move on. But you're trying to build their confidence, and all of them, for the most part, is going to have a piece of it. They may not have the whole answer. And you want to build off your pieces from one student to the next. And that way, each student feels involved. That comes to your class, it comes to your group, and they all feel they contributed something. They may not had the whole picture, but when they come away with it, they'll have the whole picture. Now, cooperative questioning, you get students to work together. I do a lot more of this with my class, and I found there's different dynamics, especially since I know my kids, they go together. If you want to do smaller group work and you got a big group coming, and you know the teacher's got this schedule ahead of time, well, plan ahead of time. I had my students ran the ecology field day for the elementary students that came over in the spring, and I told each teacher to have them divided up into groups of 5 already. And my students will work with that group of 5, and so that just made the logistics easier. I knew who I was going to have, and the teachers put together the 5 that needed some more hands-on supervision, let us say, with them, and that let the other groups open to do some more things. So individual responses, the teacher responses, you can share everything back. You're always building with what they've figured out and moving the idea forward. Let's go on to the next one. And so these are kind of some of the ideas. When you're dealing with knowledge level, it's who, what, when, where, how. It's the basic stuff. Learning that trees have leaves, they got roots, they got a wooden stem. And then we can start getting some ideas of describing. Let's go to the next one. So comprehension is really where we can get them to rephrase what they've done, what they've learned. If they're doing an activity and they're coloring these leaves different colors in the book. Can they tell me why we did this? What's this show us? And you may have told them that 10 minutes ago, but if they can rephrase it back to you, now we've got some comprehension going. Okay. So what's the main idea of something? Retelling. And let's go on to the next one, that application. So how this relate to the different situations of what's going on. And for me, I've done this long enough that I'm always pulling from something from somewhere. And we start, again, back to your audience, how you know this is an example of something. So how do you know that the trees losing their leaves is an example of the tree hibernating? And if you got an older group and they can understand that, well, it's not making chlorophyll anymore, so it's going dormant. How can you bridge that back to tree rings? Most of you probably done tree ring studies. How does the dormancy during the winter affect the tree rings? Any ideas? Right, so you got the different sizes, you got that combination for the fall winter growth that's in that tree. And they can build that into this idea. So in a few weeks, when you already talked about this and you're getting out your tree cookies and you're going to do tree ring studies, and you go back to the idea, see, the tree went dormant, and so now it's got the smaller ring, and we can go from there. What else can, if you do the idea of the trees producing growth with the tree leaves in the summer, most of the high school kids are going to know they need sunlight. How can you tell which side of the tree had the most sun? Which one had bigger rings? Because it grew more on that side, it got more sunlight. That side of the tree made more food. So you just build from one piece to another, and you keep going through the idea. Now it's easier for me because I got them all year long. I know where they're at and what's going on with them. But for other people, it may be when you got them for a short window, you're really running out of time on those kind of things. And so you just take what you can. Now, go ahead and move to the next one. Synthesis is really difficult to do in your settings unless you get them coming back. You're really getting them to synthesize and predict and to create things that would be helpful. So they really want to synthesize this idea and move on to something else. So what would you predict would happen? Let's start, we have the trees making food with chlorophyll, and we have the tree rings. It's growing bigger on this one side. We're really building that knowledge level as we move across. Okay. So when we take this, happen in the combination of that, and we get different things that are in the process of going on. And some of that builds into these different ideas of what you're going to suggest. What are some solutions to come up with this? One of my class starters from our environmental group is like, how can you get people to be more environmentally, or do things that are more environmentally friendly if you don't make them? And most of their solution was, well, we got to pay them. If you're not going to force them to do it, you got to pay them to do it. And only a couple of them really got into the idea of the intrinsic value of making change for how it's going to affect you long term. High school kids are still most of them are into the here and now and how it fits to them. The future is way too abstract. Most of my kids have a hard enough time thinking about what's going on at lunch than they are what's going on 10 years or 2 years or just down the road. So those kind of things are, you always have to build. Some kids will be able to pick this up and be involved in that. Some of that comes into their backgrounds, the extra baggage they bring into your settings that you don't know anything about. And you're gonna just have to, okay, I did the best I could. Hopefully this bit of knowledge, the things they've learned today, they can build on later. All right, go ahead and move to the next one. So your takeaways for today is know your objective and what you're trying to get across to students. Learn from your audience what they need and where they're at. So you want to match your instruction to fit up with that audience, with what you're picking up from them, help them understand and to learn and to repeat that process for the rest of their lives and your lives. After 30-some years of teaching, I'm always thinking about some way to do something a little different, make it a little better, that's a little more effective. I make a correlation or a connection I never made before. And I go, oh, that's good. And that'll work with these kids because of this reason. And that's the things you want to really focus on. Education is not an A plus B equals C proposition. There's lots of other variables in that flow chart that's going to affect what's coming on. And the frustrating thing as educators, you may not ever know what the results are of the work you do. I run across kids after 30-some odd years. I had a kid I ran across at Hardee's getting lunch. And this was a child who I gave him his book back 30 times that year. As soon as I give it back, it's laying in the hallway again. I could have strangled his. And he goes, oh, Mr. Shoaf, that was a great class. I loved coming to this. I learned about this. And it's like, you drove me nuts while you're here. So you never really know the results of what the work that you do. And you keep that in mind, and it makes it easier when you have a failure, and you're going to have failures. You're going to have things that go wrong all the time. And I want to thank you all for listening. If you got any questions, comments, you can see some of the stuff my students are working on at school over here. And we'll finish up for today. Thanks for coming out.